Good afternoon, Zach Strickland here and Brad Ganane from your FreightWaves Sonar team here to discuss some Sonar market insights and some new additions to the platform. Looks like we've got still a few people signing on, but I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Zach, I think, is going to discuss our newest added data set to start us off. Zach, what exactly are we looking at here with Transportation Air Cargo Index price? That's quite a mouthful there. Index price per kg to ship air cargo in euros, Hong Kong airport to North America.
It is a lot. But fortunately, you don't have to say it. You can just read it.
That's true.
That's the value of Sonar. So we did add some air cargo rates and volume data this week, Brad. You can find that down here in the handy dandy new category called air. And so what we did was we have added several rate indices. These are indexes. So they're essentially, you can kind of use them as a proxy for the rate for the air cargo flying from Frankfurt Airport to North America, Frankfurt Airport to Southeast Asia, Hong Kong Airport to Europe, Hong Kong Airport to North America, Shanghai Airport to Europe, and soon to be added here in the next several hours, Shanghai Airport to North America. That one is upcoming. We got that one a little bit late, but we are going to add it this week. And of course, the Shanghai Airport to North America is a very key pivotal lane in the air cargo industry, which is why we are adding that one as well. So I have the air cargo pulled up, or the rate pulled up in euros. We offer these in multiple values. It's US dollars, euro, and local currency, because that is the most common for the industry in terms of kind of trying to figure out what the rates are. Air cargo is a pretty large industry in terms of value to the transportation industry. It is a premium service. That means is that they're going to spend a lot of money. I believe it accounts for some roughly 20 to 30% of the total transportation industry by value, but it only represents about less than 1% by volume.
So are we looking at mainly on-demand, expedited? I mean, what are we looking at? I guess, how is it useful? What is it telling us? I guess, which I'm sure that's all what you have planned here to tell us today, but
yes,
I'm just gonna push you along here.
You're gonna push me along. You didn't want me to. I didn't want you to slope.
No, I didn't want you to slope that. I want you to come right out and say it.
All right. So air cargo is essentially kind of a, I think about it as kind of like a proxy for some macroeconomic stuff. It also can kind of give you an insight into the global economy, world market, which, as we have discussed on this webinar numerous times, the economy and economics of the world and US are actually quite important as it relates to the freight industry. There are numerous discussions recently in the global economy about China. I don't know if you've heard of this little country that sits across the Pacific Ocean, several billion people. They are essentially having their own kind of economic situation over there, which does impact North American economics as well as the freight market in America. If anybody saw or read the chart of the week, we made a kind of a connection between a freight market index and a macroeconomic indicator, and it showed that they kind of paralleled each other. They were highly correlated. It was the PMI, which is a macroeconomic kind of proxy for GDP. GDP, I think most people are familiar with. It basically tells you the general health of the economy. Anything below, above 2% to 3% is considered a healthy growth rate. Anything over 3 is kind of elevated growth rate. Anything over 4 is considered almost unsustainable. It's too fast, too rapid. We hit a 4.2 over the course of the summer. So anyway, coming back into the air cargo information, this stuff will actually give us an insight into basically how much money people have in the global economy. If you're not directly interested in the air cargo index that itself, like if you don't physically have a presence in the air cargo market, if you don't pay a premium to get your freight shipped across the ocean from Frankfurt, Germany, or it's essentially Europe to America, and China to America, Hong Kong, Shanghai, both Chinese markets, Shanghai being the larger of the two. And, we talk about maritime shipping all the time. That has a more direct impact on the freight market in the United States, whereas this is kind of like, you can almost see how it kind of is the spillover. Like when they can't get on a container, there's just been so much volume coming across. You can see that kind of illustrated here. That's why I have the North America, the Hong Kong to North America. For this purpose, it really doesn't matter what currency I'm using right now, but we do have this in US dollars just to kind of make that a little bit easier for people to relate to. You see, you can go in here, click on air, and you click on one of these transportation air cargo price per kg. I can go in here and pick euros, origin currency, or US dollars. They're all essentially going to look very similar, but a little bit more relatable.
Well, and I know we've drawn several correlations previously with the FreightWaves data, the spot container pricing from China to North America West Coast, and looking at some of the LA volumes that brings. And I think from talking with a lot of our customers and subscribers, that's found extremely valuable and useful, and kind of forecasting volumes into specific areas based on these spot container prices. So how would you say that, I know you touched on it, but how would you say that the air cargo data is relevant, and what is it, like how would you say it works in unison with or in correlation with the FreightWaves data, and then potentially with the over-the-road data that we have as well in some of these port, or I guess airport, where some of this freight's coming into?
So I kind of shrunk the chart a little bit because we don't have FreightWaves information more than the past 18 months or so. Sure. But because it's a relatively new index that they created, but I kind of overlaid the FreightWaves North America, China to North American West Coast to kind of illustrate what this is. You can see that the FreightWaves, the container, almost led the air cargo price because what happened was that they essentially just blew up the ships, and then eventually people started paying more to get their freight across the ocean. As we hit the deadline, obviously there was a little bit more expeditiousness, if that's a word, to the air cargo, so they could wait later in the year to ship it off. But you see, it still peaked around the same time, about Thanksgiving. Something to note, this is a weekly index, just for those of you that are wondering. And then it has fallen off ever since. So basically this is, it's not going to give you that granular kind of what's happening in New York or Los Angeles type detail, like how do I increase spot rates, whatnot. No, this is more of one of those things. You're either in the air cargo industry, you ship something, or deal with commodities, such as a lot of heavy semiconductors and pharmaceuticals. Those are both very high value items. So there's enough room in the price to kind of cover the shipping of these commodities across in air, because air costs a lot more than the ships or the surface transportation. So essentially that's where that value is. And if you obviously deal with heavy pharmaceuticals or things with heavy semiconductor presence, microchips, things like that, high value stuff, you're interested in the air cargo industry in general, because that's how you get your freight into the country. So other than rates for air cargo, just to wrap up our new indices of the week, we also have air cargo volume and revenue ton miles. Similar to the rate indices, these are kind of more of a proxy for the economic activity in general. You're probably not going to glean a whole lot of granular value in the freight market itself, but it will kind of tell you just how much is being moved through the air. The more stuff that's being moved through the air, I think everybody can kind of tell from this chart with the American airline. There are 11 airlines in here that are represented. And you can see this is kind of going up over time. This one is a monthly indicator. We got this information from A4A, Airlines for America. They were gracious enough to share this with us. So basically, to see how much freight is moving in the air is kind of a proxy for how much freight is moving on the ground. Again, if you're interested in air freight in general, this is going to have a lot more value to you. And that's why we added it, really. We didn't really add it to be, kind of a macro, but I'm kind of relating it to our current user base. We do have a lot more in the pipeline relating to air cargo to kind of add that to Sonar's repertoire, if you will. But this is like the first piece of that puzzle as we move forward with kind of adding more and more data for various forms of transportation in the United States and also the world.
Yeah. And I think there's some specific, I think UPS, Amazon, right? FedEx
Absolutely.
data as well.
That's good to, let's just pull up good old UPS. The tickers are pretty intuitive here. Air RTM will get you the revenue per ton mile. And then UPS or FDX are the UPS. So as UPS has obviously taken off here, I love this right here though. Last Christmas, there was a lot of air freight on UPS. This is kind of a proxy for a holiday season. You see volume was actually a little bit less than it was this time last year. I think UPS was a little bit more prepared. But yeah, that is a good use case for this. You can see that it peaks every year right around the holidays. Look at that, good old 12/25. I think something happens that day. Is when the holiday peak hits and whatnot. So I think that introduces it.
Now it's time, ding, 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 for our new session called Stump the Sultan, where we're going to go through some questions that as our Sonar team we receive on maybe a daily, weekly basis, and they need some expertise of the Sultan, Zach Strickland, to answer. How can you use Sonar for strategic decision making? What are your go-to data sets? What are your go-to things that you look at for strategic decision making?
Strategic decision making as it pertains to pricing and freight.
Correct.
And well, I think
asset utilization, whichever you want to tackle first, whichever side you'd like to tackle first.
Okay. So my favorite thing to look at, obviously, for anything is our number one proprietary index, the outbound tender rejection index. That's going to give me a quick glance. Volume is great. I think it's the most relatable. But at the same time, it does not tell you the full story. Tender rejections are going to give you that quick hit indication of what capacity is available in the market that day, because looking at DAT rates, you may not see any kind of smaller movements in capacity changes. What the tender rejection does is it measures route guide compliance. As the route guides get adhered to more often, you're going to see the tender rejections fall. Therefore, you're not going to bounce down through those route guides, which you get increasing rates and lower service levels kind of bouncing down through them. So tender rejections may go up, but it may never hit the spot market. So that's the kind of stuff that I like to look at first, just to see what general market sentiment is. Right now, we are at the lowest that the tender rejection has ever been, 8.32. We've actually been falling quite rapidly since Christmas, breaking through some of these boundaries. This is the slowest time of year, but we are in the polar opposite of last year at this time. Last year, tender rejection rates were super high. That's because I think we've discussed it quite a lot, where you had outdated contracts. Now everything is kind of flipped. Everybody's got these higher rates. Carriers are happy with the rates in the contract side, but also they've added capacity. The market is more balanced than it was last year. We did not have a crazy hurricane season or holiday kind of shipping season that kept everybody in check. So we're not recovering from anything like that still. This year is basically the polar opposite. It is a shipper's paradise, if you will.
Perfect. Now, phase two of that question, from looking at some of the historic data, proprietary data that is within Sonar, and looking at some of the, whether it be year over year, or volume flows, if you will, how can you use what has happened and the near time or real time data to understand and make reasonably accurate forecasts through the Sonar data?
So just like we kind of did, I'm going to go ahead and switch to the OTVI.
Oh, okay. Switch lanes.
Just to kind of change it up a little bit so I'm not beating up the same index. These are obviously the favorite two. These are our two big proprietary behemoths, if you will, in terms of value added. Outbound tender volume index yearly change is what I have pulled up right here. I did it just to kind of illustrate we are actually operating at a much higher volume than we were this time year over year.
And this is just Atlanta, right?
This is just Atlanta, but we have increased.
And that's the index value, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So this is the year over year change. So it's not the absolute value.
Okay.
I'm going to pull up Los Angeles actually to kind of give a better, because the Los Angeles market has obviously like been the big player as we've discussed. So the volume out of Los Angeles is huge this time versus this time last year. We are operating at volumes much higher, but tender rejections are coming down. What that tells us, if you've been following us, is that essentially the market has been able to kind of bolt on a bunch of capacity. The OEMs were backlogged. A lot of those things came in. It is the standard kind of, everything's super hot. I'm going to go out and buy a bunch of stuff. We had tax cuts that allowed a lot of the carriers to go out and purchase new trucks. So they were able to hire a lot more people. Their ORs have declined. One of our new data sets added over the last couple of months, the TCA benchmarking indices are very valuable to the carriers out there. This kind of gives you, you can listen to earnings calls all you want, but you can also go in here and see what operating ratios are kind of the consensus. You see, look at these operating ratios that for the people that are members of the Truckload Carriers Association Best Practices Group, they are dropping. This is kind of the general trend over the course of the last couple of years as ORs kind of go up and down, but they're definitely on a trend down at 87. They're trending towards 87 in October of this year or November.
And that's good. Why? For the number to go down.
So ORs, operating ratios, for those that aren't familiar, that's basically a measurement of operating efficiency within a company. The lower the number, that means your revenue to expense ratio is increasing. So revenue is going up, expenses are not increasing at the same rate if your OR goes down. Or you could just be cutting costs and your revenue stays the same. It's essentially operating revenue divided by operating expenses divided by operating revenue. Mm-hmm. So the lower proportion of your expenses to the revenue or your sales, that's better. It does not include things like interest and debt and taxes. So all of that stuff is pulled out of that number. The lower the number is, the more efficient you are at operating. So it includes things like driver wages, any kind of back office overhead, truck maintenance, that type of stuff. So when that number goes down, that's an indication that they're doing pretty well.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's certainly valuable when you're trying to figure out how well am I doing against the rest of the kind of the industry. I know when I was a financial analyst for a period of time, I had no idea how to measure us against the rest of the world. We never really lined up with, the big carriers. We didn't really line up with the small carriers either. So we kind of needed something to kind of give us, a lot of these guys are privately held. So it's not necessarily the people that you can get a lot of information about on the internet or through earnings calls and things like that.
Sure.
But back to your original question.
I know you tried to get away from it.
I kind of segued there, but
tried to get away.
But I think that's also really important.
It's
I think that actually kind of lines up with what I was trying to say, is that you can be operating in, a hot market, a cold market, a flat market, but you need to know how well you're doing against everyone else, because there's going to be different operating challenges for you versus what, other carriers are doing. And you need somewhere to kind of go to glean, well, we operated at a 98 OR in October. Looks like the rest of the country operated a lot better than we did. Yeah. We are doing something wrong. And that is very important to kind of know. I actually wanted to pull up the outbound tender volume index, Los Angeles. And kind of to your point about figuring out the long-term versus near-term, The way I look at it is you always want to look at your year over year in terms of getting a general sense of seasonality and what's happening. Everybody thinks they know what season is going to happen, but they don't know what seasons are going to happen, like kind of irregular seasonalities. Like the ones in LA that we experienced this year were not the same seasons that we saw in years past. Looking backward, all the way back to last year, we had increasing volumes, but they weren't, they were significantly lower. Now we're, like 80% higher, almost 100% higher year over year. And the market's able to handle it.
Right.
So that's where volume and capacity kind of don't mix. Like we've had this long and also this trend line of volume increasing over the year. Carriers have figured out I can go to LA and keep my truck moving.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we figured out most recently, for those of you that have watched FreightWaves Now,
shameless plug,
yeah.
Shameless plug,
is that a lot of this movement is actually happening regionally or intrastate. And I almost consider Arizona intrastate for Los Angeles because that is kind of a satellite sister city. A lot of this volume, and I'm going to switch to the inbound tender volume index real fast. And just kind of,
that was going to be my next question. How are you able to show and know that we're looking at high amounts of local volume?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and pull up. A lot of these things, it's not necessarily that I had to know the market they were related, but anybody that deals with freight knows that Northern California, Southern California, and Phoenix kind of operate, kind of like a hub and spoke satellite. Mm-hmm. A lot of the freight moves out of LA, hits Phoenix, hits Northern California, goes to Reno and Las Vegas. And there's less freight coming in to LA from those markets than there is going out. So what I did was I just went up and I found Stockton, here it is, inbound tender volume index is going up almost at the exact same rate as the LA market had outbound volume. So from that, I was kind of like, well, most of their volume I know comes from Los Angeles, Ontario market. We looked at the map one day. I'll go ahead and pull that up. I'm going to pull up the inbound tender. We don't give the inbound tender rejection or the inbound tender volume rejection or volume index a lot of love, but I'm going to pull up the weekly change because that's what we like to do on the map. And you can see these markets right here are highlighted in blue, a lot of inbound going in there over the last week, relatively so. From this map, you can also kind of see if you're a carrier out there trying to figure out where's all the freight going. If you're going to have a lot of inbound going into a market, that means there's going to be excess trucks in those markets as well. You can almost glean a head haul type scenario, which we also have the Headhaul Index. And there's value in that, knowing what times a year are these places going to have an oversupply of trucks. From that, you're going to look at the Headhaul Index. The Headhaul Index is probably one of my favorites. It's a little bit more complicated to explain. What it is the outbound volume subtracting the inbound volume. So a positive Headhaul Index means that you have a lot more outbound than inbound. A negative Headhaul Index indicates that you have a lot more inbound than outbound, otherwise known as a backhaul market, like your Miamis and Seattle.
Let's pull up the Stockton market because I know there's been some interesting things happening there right now, and as you just showed on the map, it looks like they're experiencing just a large amount of inbound freight.
Huge inbound. And Stockton, Northern California is traditionally a backhaul market. You can see that represented in the Headhaul Index value. It's largely negative, but it's not a tremendous backhaul market. Now it is.
Yeah, what's going on up there?
Yeah.
This is another one of your questions. Ready? Mm-hmm. Go.
Well, it's just like I explained. Like if I go out here, and what do you think if I pull up the outbound or the Headhaul Index for LA? What's that going to look like?
We're going to be high positive correlation.
Look at that. It's actually negative correlation.
Okay, that's what I
It's a negative correlation. Anytime you see divergence with the alligator mouth, that is a negative correlation, and it's almost extremely negatively correlated.
So dare we pull up Phoenix as well?
Let's do it.
Just to see?
Let's do it. Let's see what happens.
See if your hub and spoke holds true. Oh, okay.
Ooh,
I see some correlation there.
The difference is that Phoenix is almost
There's
always like heavy backhaul. And so they did kind of recover. They became a lot less backhaul than they were back here, but now they're going back the other direction. But a lot of this is the warehouse. Everybody's repositioning their freight after they pulled all that freight into the market. And that's kind of the near-term value of Sonar. Sonar's trying to answer what's going on right now. It's good for looking at trends. The longer that we have our tender volume and tender rejection indexes, that's going to provide a lot more value for people to kind of get that year over year. We just crossed the line to where we have year over year data on the tender rejections for the 6 big markets in October. We're now getting a lot more depth on that just now for all the other markets in the country. Tender volume, we got to wait, except for the big 6, Seattle, Los Angeles, Dallas, Chicago, Atlanta, and Philadelphia. We're going to have to wait another month to get that year over year in there, but that's coming.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we're getting a little close on time here, there's a couple more things I want to cover though quickly, and I know you touched on it there a second ago, I think, and covered in your article because of questions that we've had. But what are some things within Sonar? I know we focus heavy on the proprietary Sonar data for good reason, of course, but what are some of the really common data sets or surrounding data sets that truly are available elsewhere in the market that you can look at alongside of with Sonar or with the proprietary data, which is, of course, available in here at the third-party data sets as well?
I've talked about CAS quite a bit, but I'm pulling up the CAS shipment volume index. Like I said earlier, the chart of the week, I'll go ahead and just recreate it. The chart of the week this week was the CAS with the PMI overlaid on it, which for those of you that don't know, the CAS index, let me put this on a dual real quick so you can see it. The CAS shipments index is essentially measuring the total freight volume in the United States. That also includes rail, as well as the truckload surface transport. And the PMI is a measure of macroeconomic activity like GDP, as it has a value over 50, which you'll see over here. It still has a value of over 50, 54.1 as of November, the end of November. Anything over 50 means that the economy is still expanding or growing. It may not be growing as fast as flat to down right now. With your very near time outbound tender rejection index, which I don't think it needs a lot of explaining to know that all-time lows on tender rejection mean that capacity is significantly higher than it has been. For those of you involved in the market directly, you probably already noticed this. If I'm a broker, I am tightening my margins and trying to get to the volume play. It makes it really easy, especially if I have some elevated contracts out there. I know I can go out there and get a truck and I can test some of these markets. Like specifically, I'm watching Los Angeles right now with that elevated volume. Capacity is still okay though. Like, so I know that I don't have a lot of room to kind of negotiate higher on the spot market. Now, when people come to me on the transactional side, I know that I'm going to probably need to be a little bit more aggressive. I'm going to need to tighten that up, but I also know that I can probably land a truck just about anywhere at this point in time.
You feel that confident?
I do.
All right, now we're going into our last few minutes here, so we'll open it up for questions. And my final question for you, just maybe to help the listeners get a little better feel for who you are as a person, Zach. Can you give us one fun fact about yourself for everyone out there listening today?
I am currently not wearing a hat.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is quite something for you.
Yeah. No.
I have to say.
I mean, I didn't mean to blow your mind.
And you heard it here first. That
Yeah.
did. I was not expecting that at all. I was, about ready for maybe I have 2 wonderful kids. I like long walks on the beach.
I didn't want to be
bird watching.
I didn't want to be another cliche.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. Well, maybe I'll give you more time to think about that next week. In the meantime, if you guys have any questions, we'll hang here on the line for you. If you're gonna jump off, thanks for joining us. And have any questions, of course, reach out to us. If you have a contact over here at FreightWaves, please do. Our market experts, all their contact info is available on the FreightWaves website. The Sonar team specific, freightwaves.com/sonar. And again, we'll hang here. I'm not going to be here next week, so you'll have a surprise guest. I'm not going to reveal that to you, but please listen in to find out who that's going to be. And again, we'll be hanging around for a few minutes. Let us know if you have any questions. Thanks. Okay, no questions looks like this week. Thanks again for joining us. I'll see you next week at 2 Eastern for the Sonar Market Insights webinar. Zach and Brad here signing off.